Well done. If I admit to you that I finished writing this sermon at 11:30 last night, you will understand why I woke up this morning with a bit of a migraine. We are going this morning where angels fear to tread. Quite possibly, historically, this is one of the passages that has been most used against people, a passage that has been used to beat people with. Do you remember last week we talked about the 6 antitheses, they're called, the 6 phrases where Jesus takes a part of the law and he said, "You have heard that it was said, but I tell you." Well, we established then that Jesus isn't coming to argue with the law, he isn't coming to disagree with the law or to say that the law is wrong, but actually he's coming to fulfill the law and to explain to the people listening and to us how their understanding of the law, how our understanding of the law has become skewed. Their interpretation of the law has gone a bit off kilter. And let's be honest, it's really easy for us to do that. So, we come this morning and we read something about divorce and we translate it into our modern day Western understanding. We need to take a step back. Before we start to look at what God is saying to us this morning, we need again to remember that this was a sermon, a whole long discourse that Jesus gave to his disciples and to the crowd of people who wanted to hear what this new rabbi had to say. I know for some of you today, this is a hard topic because of what you or your family or someone that you love has been through. Maybe you've been on the receiving end of this behaviour when your partner has been unfaithful. Or maybe today you find yourself divorced, and for some of you that was not your choice, and it is heartbreaking. So church, if I promise to tread carefully, will you trust me this morning as we together open God's word and try and listen to what Jesus really said? And try and figure out what it meant for the people who were on the mountain as he spoke that day, and then for us today. So let's read together. We're starting Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 37. You can read along in your booklets. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.' But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's God's throne, or by the earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." You can see why this sermon caused me so much anguish this week to write. The thing is, we know that one thing leads to another, doesn't it? Just like last week, anger, when left to burn out of control, can lead to murder. So lust, when left to burn out of control, leads potentially to adultery and then to divorce. I said it's a difficult passage. I know that it has in the past been used to beat people with. It's been used in judgment over people. And people here who are divorced, I know that a lot of you are already carrying significant hurt, disappointments, broken hopes and dreams. And the last thing you need this morning is some heavy-handed preacher adding to your heartbreak. So before we start, will you remember the one who spoke these words? Remember the one who is love and the one who came not to condemn. The one who created you, who holds you in the palm of his hand. The one who loves you so much that he came and gave his own life for you so that you could have life. That's important. When we remember who spoke these words, then that helps us to temper them. That helps us to hear them as they were intended, not how they may have been used in anger against you. There are a couple of things that we need to remember that we talked about last week before we dive headfirst into the passage. Remember that we said about our translation, the NIV talks about being in danger of the flames of hell, and we said that that's a Western English translation. The original word in the Greek that Jesus used was a word Gehenna. And Gehenna, he said, you're in danger of the fires of Gehenna. And Gehenna was a real place that the people hearing Jesus that day would have known about. They would have understood exactly what he was talking about. And Gehenna was a valley outside Jerusalem, outside of the city walls, that had become a rubbish dump, a huge, smouldering, stinking, fetid rubbish dump, permanently burning, a foul, hellish place. So when Jesus talks about being in danger of the fires of Gehenna, that would have made real sense to the people. You know, this isn't some dreaded comeuppance somewhere down the line when you die. It's real. And it's now. Your actions have consequences now. And the second thing I need to remind us is we know, don't we, that this is one continuous sermon. In fact, can I encourage you, if I haven't already, to actually read your booklets from start to finish. Read the whole Sermon on the Mount as a continuous sermon. Feel the flow of it. Hear what Jesus said from start to finish. And we see that Jesus starts his sermon listing the people who are blessed by God. Those who will inherit the kingdom and the blessings of God. And the first thing that we noticed is that everything was turned on its head. And that's important to remember, and it's important to remember today. It's particularly important today. You see, people who you wouldn't think of as blessed, Jesus called blessed. Those who are mourning, those who are meek, the merciful, the hungry, the thirsty, the poor, all called blessed by God. Not the rich, not the strong or the powerful, the people that you would logically have thought were in their positions of power and wealth because God had blessed them. Jesus says, no, it's the other way round. It's the other way around. And then the sermon finishes ultimately with a parable where Jesus stresses the importance of not just listening to his words, not just hearing what he says, but by putting his words into action. And he said, this is how the firm foundation of our faith will be built. This is how we can start to build the house of our faith. And if we remember that everything that we're going to be looking at in between comes in between these two boundaries, beginning with the call to live distinctively, to live differently to the people and the nations around. There's that call to have a distinctive taste, to have a distinctive flavour. I said to my son, my middle son, he's 23, I was talking this over with him. I said, Jack, we're called to be salty. I didn't realise that has completely changed its meaning in today's world. If someone today is being salty, they're being a bit sarcastic. They're being a bit mean. It's total. So I'm saying to Jack, I'm going to preach to the church and tell them we have to be salty. And he's like, really, Mum? So I'm just emphasising for any of those of you who are, into this kind of, language. But we're called to be distinctive. We're called to reflect the light of Jesus, to be salt, to be light. And so everything else that we read in the middle, all of these 6 antitheses and everything else that comes, well, they're kind of the filling in the pie. This is Jesus saying, be distinctive, build your life on me, and this is how, this is what those lives look like. So are we ready? Pray for me, I'm going in. Okay. Jesus is again quoting directly from the 10 Commandments when he says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But again, just like last week, he wants to correct the people in their interpretation of the law. You see, it wasn't just Jesus' intention that you don't actually physically sleep with someone else outside of your marriage. It was his intention that actually you should never be anywhere near even being able to commit adultery. And Jesus says, in order to be nowhere near to the physical act of adultery, you shouldn't even look at a woman lustfully. Now, this is one of the places where the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the times, well, they would have absolutely agreed with Jesus on this point. You can imagine them nodding, yes, absolutely right, Jesus. Because there was a group of them, a group of really strict Pharisees who were so intent on keeping themselves pure, so frightened of accidentally looking at a woman and finding her attractive, that they walked around with their eyes constantly averted, looking down, or with their eyes closed. And they were always walking into things or falling over things, and they got the nickname Bleeding Nose Pharisees. The thing is, there is absolutely nothing wrong with admiring how beautiful or how handsome someone is. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, you walk past a handsome person on the street and you notice that they're attractive. Well, unless you're blind, of course you do. There is nothing wrong with that. What is wrong, though, is the second glance, the lingering look, the letting your imagination run free. That's dangerous stuff. That's a very dangerous path to be on, because that is the path that leads to broken relationships, broken families, and it just breaks hearts and causes deep hurts. And again, just like last week, Jesus uses hyperbole to make a really important point. He exaggerates to the point of ridiculousness. And he says, if you do have that second look, or that third look, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Ooh. Now, no one, not for 1 minute, intends you to mutilate yourself. Let's get this clear. This is Jesus using hyperbole to emphasize how serious this is. If your eye is causing you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand is causing you to sin, chop it off. So, okay, if he doesn't literally mean chop your hand off or poke your eye out, what actually is he talking about? Just imagine for a minute that you are married. Imagine that you travel to work on a train. Imagine that you start chatting to someone on your journey to work and you start to build a friendship. This is a story that was told to me many years ago by someone. Fine, wonderful. But what if you start to let your mind wander? Many of us have been married for quite a little while. Sometimes the romance isn't as shiny as it once was. You know, when you run into the bathroom and you're having conversations while you're trying to brush your teeth, you know. Sometimes maybe your wife or partner isn't as much fun as they once were. Maybe they're tired. Stuff's going on. And sometimes you go through long times of difficulty, don't you? With illness, money worries, or worries about the kids and the grandkids. You know the stuff. You've lived it. And all of a sudden, the grass seems to look a little bit faded on your side of the fence and a whole lot greener over there. Well, I've got news for you, church. The grass is greener where it's tended and watered. Jesus says, gouge your eye out. Get it out and get rid of it. In other words, if the temptation is the train journey to work, well, cut it out. Get a different train. Go an hour earlier or something. Take drastic action. Cut the opportunity for temptation right out. Better, he says, to perform drastic surgery now than to be thrown on the rubbish dump and to be completely burned up. Take drastic action. If you notice that you are starting to fall into a pattern of temptation, cut it out now. Be drastic about it. And then he goes on to talk about divorce. He says, it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So we've heard Jesus say that our righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees, yes? Yes. Okay. So if in Jesus' day you wanted to divorce, no, actually start again, men, if in Jesus' day, men, you wanted to divorce women, tough. But men, if you wanted to divorce your wife, then according to the letter of the law, you had to publicly announce it before witnesses and issue your wife a certificate of divorce. That was legal. It was within the Jewish law. You could do that and still be considered righteous. Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 to 4, Moses is speaking and he says this. He says, if a man marries a woman and then it happens that he no longer likes her because he has found something wrong with her, glad Adrian's not here this morning, he may give her divorce papers, put them in her hand and send her off. And Jesus comes along and he says, what? Don't think you fulfilled the law simply because you gave your wife a certificate when you sent her off down the road. Don't think for a minute that that is living righteously, living distinctively. He says, no, you're not fulfilling the law when you get a divorce unless you have a really good reason. And interestingly, Jesus was speaking into a specific situation when he was talking about this, because a generation or so before Jesus, there were two very famous rabbis who interpreted the laws, which is the Ten Commandments, the teachings of Moses. And I was reading about these guys. I'd heard of them and I'd read them a bit, but I've been researching them. And you know they say there's nothing new under the sun, don't they? Well, there's this one rabbi called Rabbi Shammai. I apologise to any people of Jewish heritage listening for my appalling pronunciation of their names. But Rabbi Shammai, he was really strict. And I suppose today we would call him ultra-conservative. And the other rabbi, Rabbi Hillel, was more lenient, more tolerant of things. So when it came to the question of marriage and divorce, these rabbis both looked at the teachings of Moses and they did their best to interpret the law so that people could live within it. And Rabbi Shammai said, look, unless your wife has committed adultery or done something equally serious, then you can't just divorce her. You have promised under oath to provide for her and protect her, and you have a legal and moral responsibility to do that. Rabbi Hillel, on the other hand, looked at the teachings, and particularly that line that says he's found something wrong in her. And he said, look, as long as you issue your wife a certificate of divorce, then you can divorce her for any reason. They were actually called any cause divorce. You can... just awful. So for instance, if she burns your food, I am really glad Adrian's not here this morning. So if she burns your food, you can divorce her. Or if you meet someone more attractive than she is, then you can divorce her. I kid you not. And all you had to do was go out into the public square and announce 3 times in front of witnesses, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. That was it. Give her a piece of paper, off you go. Now, You have to remember that women had 0 rights in those days. No rights at all. They couldn't own property. They didn't have the right to inherit. Their testimony wasn't valid in a court of law. And so women were considered property. Until they were married, they were considered the property of their father. I mean, it sounds awful, and it was, but in the culture of the day, this was to keep them safe within the family. They would be loved, protected, provided, and cared for. And so when they got married, they entered into a covenant, a promise relationship with their husband, who promised to take on that role of loving his wife, of protecting her, providing for her and caring for her, because without him she had no means at all of supporting or providing for herself. It's not like today. This is a totally different culture. We have to understand that. So Jesus said, if you just divorce your wife for any reason, you're either forcing her to go back to the mercy of her family, but if they can't afford to keep her, then she has no choice but to either marry someone else or to turn to prostitution to support herself. There is no other choice. There is no welfare state, no food bank, no benefits. And Jesus says, by doing this, you are forcing her into adultery. Let me read to you from the Message translation. I don't always like this, but it does make the point really well here. The Message translation says, remember the scripture that says, whoever divorces his wife, let him do it legally, giving her divorce papers and her legal rights. Too many of you are using that as a cover for selfishness and whim, pretending to be righteous just because you are legal. Please, no more pretending. If you divorce your wife, you're responsible for making her an adulteress, unless she has already made herself that by sexual promiscuity. And if you marry such a divorced adulteress, you're automatically an adulterer yourself. You can't use legal cover to mask a moral failure. So you see, Jesus wasn't just addressing a moral point here and fleshing out the law. He was actually standing up for the rights of the women of the day, which was pretty much unheard of. Remember what I said at the beginning about turning things that people understood upside down? So what's the message for today? Is it that divorce is okay then? Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's the message. And we see that as Jesus goes on to talk about oaths, he talks about taking your oaths, your promises, seriously. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Mean what you say. Be honourable. I've had the immense privilege of officiating several weddings. They're wonderful. And one of the things I do when someone asks me to officiate their wedding is I sit them down and we have a long series of kind of meetings in the lead up to the day. And one of the things that I do is I really hammer home how serious the promises are that they're going to be making to each other. That not only will they be making those promises in front of me, but they will be making them before God. And that really is serious stuff. As we stand at the altar, we make those promises to love each other for better or for worse, in sickness as well as in health, and for richer or for poorer. I mean, I know we all hope it's going to be sickness, health and richer, but life isn't like that, is it? And we promise each other that we will stand together, united, and we promise to forsake all others for as long as we both shall live. It's not something to be entered into lightly. It's not like buying a car, you know, you sign on the dotted line and I'll have this one till a more shiny model comes along that can go faster and has got more flashing lights on the dashboard. This is a covenant relationship that you're entering into. And I really do make that so clear to anyone who comes to me to get married. You see, the Bible has some pretty strong words to say about divorce, doesn't it? Malachi chapter 2 verse 16 says, God says, I hate divorce. I hate divorce. Now don't mishear me or misunderstand me. God says I hate divorce, not I hate divorcees. He does not say that. And I need to make sure that some of you in this room have got that really clearly, that you are listening to me and that you hear that. God says I hate divorce, not I hate divorcees. You see, God loves you so very much that he came to earth in the person of his son and he gave his life for you. He loves you. But he hates divorce because of the hurt, the pain, the brokenness and the destruction that is left in its wake. That doesn't mean that God says you can never get divorced no matter what. See, marriage, when done properly, is meant to be a reflection of the relationship between Christ and his church, that husbands and wives live in mutual respect and honour, loving, providing for, protecting and caring for each other, each causing the other to flourish. That's what God intends for marriage. So this morning, listen to me carefully. If you are in an abusive relationship or if your partner is unfaithful, then no one is telling you that you have to stay there. Even if your partner is not unfaithful, if he or she is abusive towards you, then you have permission to leave. But the thing is today, the world says, if something's broken, don't try and fix it, just throw it out and get a new one. We live in a disposable society, don't we? Nothing is built to last anymore. Our technology has built-in obsolescence, which means that in a couple of years, even if you look after it really, really well, it simply won't work anymore. We buy clothes cheaply and we throw them away. I am a product of my generation. I wouldn't have a clue. I'm not looking at Alma. I wouldn't have a clue how to darn a sock or how to mend a zip. I've thrown away a whole pair of trousers before now for want of a button. I know. I know. And that attitude to our stuff has pervaded into our attitude about relationships. People talk to me of falling out of love. What does that even mean? And so in our dissatisfaction, instead of working together to fix and to strengthen our marriages, we declare them broken and we throw them away, just like our old technology or a pair of trousers with the button off. And sometimes we find ourselves thrown out, like those broken jeans, discarded, all of our hopes and our dreams shattered. You know, when you stood at that altar and you looked into your partner's eyes and you made your promises to each other, I know that on that day you stood there with your head full of dreams of what you thought your future together would look like. And instead that future that you'd mapped out suddenly veered off course and your heart is broken. That's why God hates divorce. Because he doesn't want you to be hurt or broken. He wants you to be loved and to show love. I found this last night, which I offer to you now. I found it at 11:30. I was just about to turn the laptop off and I was like, Lord, I need something. I need a something. And I came across this. It's written by a Christian theologian who specialises in the Old Testament. He says this: if anyone wonders whether there can be life and grace after divorce, it's worth meditating on a statement in Jeremiah. Often in the Bible, the main metaphor used to describe God's relationship to Israel is a marriage. Likewise, the main metaphor for idolatry is adultery. So through the prophet Jeremiah, God says, I gave faithless Israel her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of all her adulteries. Many people know that in Malachi God says, I hate divorce, but they may not know why. God has been through it. He knows the humiliation of rejection and betrayal from hard-hearted people like me. God hates divorce because God is a divorcee. So he invented the first divorce recovery program. It started at a place called Calvary. The price was a cross. The program is still underway. Shall we pray?